And if we can keep it not too long, George, because...
well, I've got quite a lot of themes and I want to get the news out. So let me start by making... This is John Patterson talking in East Sussex to Professor George Lees, who's up in the Scottish borders, and we're going to be talking about issues about the manipulation of the news on a daily basis based on the revelations we're making about frauds, massive war crimes, and the jokes that the people that perpetrate both the economic frauds, the financial services crimes, and also the genocidal or martyrdom campaigns. We've talked about religion and the background to that. We've talked a lot about fraud in Edinburgh. So when I opened up the news channels this morning, it confirmed for me that everything that we've talked about in previous videos is covered by the BBC, and what they do is they drop the names in and they completely and oppositely portray the issues that we've explicitly exposed as crimes and frauds, as innocent activities, using related names as cover-ups or as diversions from the news that's breaking. So in the summary for Radio 4's today's programme this morning, Malcolm Rifkind, who we've exposed as a director at G4S, as a director at Aberdeen Asset Management, as a member of the Better Off Together movement out of Kensington in leafy London, he appeared in the summary of the Today programme news denouncing and defaming Rosneft and the Russian manipulation of Rosneft when we talked only yesterday about the merger between BP and Rosneft that took place 18 months ago, and the unacceptable face of capitalism that is the ownership of Lonrho and BP. Lonrho has owned BP and all of its subsidiaries like Centrica and so many others across the globe for decades, since Tiny Rowlands left the internment camp on the Isle of Man in the middle of World War II. He was the founder of that vicious organisation that was there to steal the assets from sub-Saharan Africa. Rifkind was exposed as an overlapping director with Sir John Anthony Chilcot in the videos that Gordon Bowden and George Lees made a month ago. They are sensational videos, because what we're talking about there is the inquest chair for the arms to Iraq scandal and the Foreign Secretary in 2002 being overlapping directors at Abraxa, which is based in Earl Grey Street in Edinburgh, and is close to Lothian Road, where all of the massive virtual oil and gas frauds were perpetrated by the Cairn Empire. Okay, and what you heard discussed in the next article on Radio 4 this morning was the involvement of law in criminality. Now, John and I have made videos on the involvement in relatively petty crimes of the Law Society and people like Naismith and Stuart Fair in Scotland, who are advisors to the Scottish Government but are involved in laundering, and Stuart Fair is connected to the same Finchley boiler rooms that have been used for money laundering since Mrs. Thatcher was in power. Okay? So there's an emphasis on corrupted law enforcement, the involvement of police. We talked yesterday and the day before on the Sunday this weekend of the asset stripping of British police by money launderers who are actually working for Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. Zoe Billingham, we revealed the links to prominent politicians who are Labour politicians. Okay, we don't want to waste time on that. We also talked in all of the videos we've made recently about the life of Greg Hallett, the role of Peter Williams QC, New Zealand's highest ranking law enforcer, in the funding of the IRA networks in Australasia, the persecution and death threats to Greg Hallett that he received when he lived in New Zealand, and subsequently the cancer that Peter Williams contracted, and Greg Hallett was prepared to confront that corrupted lawyer in the law courts with absolute truths that silenced him. Yeah? Now, so this morning when I tune into Radio 4, you find that Australia's in the news again. And I revealed a few months ago that Australia had something shameful on its records when I revealed what Quentin Bryce, the Governor General, who is more powerful, according to Greg Hallett, than any elected official in Australia. She earned £360,000 a year to be a diplomat, and I learned from her the identity of Mr. Bean. Now, they made a joke about Mr. Bean at the opening of the London 2012 Olympics with a cynical gesture showing a man called, what's the name of the actor in Blackadder? Rowen Atkinson, who played Mr. Bean, a pathetic figure, but was brought onto the world stage like Her Royal Highness, who was pictured with James Bond jumping out of an aeroplane under a parachute. That was an actress who played the Queen, but the Queen watched it from the podium where she was sat next to Kofi Annan and all the world leaders. Who's that? Ban Ki-moon was there, all the dignitaries that helped with the Olympic fundraising and the Olympic profiteering that took place in the HSBC building in Canary Wharf. Okay, so the joke is, and it was revealed by the Governor General Quentin Bryce in Australia, that Mr. Bean, the real historic character, was the war correspondent for Galipoli. And every Anzac, including the middle school teacher that I met on the weekend, knows that Winston Churchill botched the campaign in Gallipoli. And now that John Patterson and I understand the mission in every global war is to cull the poor people, it makes perfect sense. Quentin Bryce makes a little video clip. It's all covered on my website, and when I reveal that she's
just give your website out, please, because I'm going to
Prof George Lee's /Revelations, and if you look at World War II, the elite scandal in the index, or Global Wars, the elite scandal, you'll begin to see the gravity and the magnitude of the joke that was made at the war dead's expense at the opening ceremony of the London Olympics. That same man, Rowen Atkinson, has made multiple Blackadder videos. They portray Butcher Haig as a dumb general who's more interested in his horses than the people. When they're coming out of the trenches in World War I, the man who's the chief fundraiser for the Labour Party and presents the Time Team history on the BBC, on the telly, I forget his name, but he says cynically,
yeah, go on.
What's the name of Blackadder's sidekick?
It was just on the tip of the tongue then.
Well, it's relatively unimportant, but that man is the main fundraiser for the Labour Party and the new Labour Party and all the genocides that they conducted. And he's in the Time Team. It would be good if we could remember it, because he's somebody Robinson. Tony Robinson. Tony Robinson, is that correct? The little guy that plays, you know, I Have a Cunning Plan.
Yes.
Tony Robinson. He's the chief fundraiser for the Labour Party in Britain, or he was in the Blair regime, and he is also a historian, in inverted commas. He's a joker. Yeah, it's a laugh at the war dead's expense. When he comes up the World War I ladder into the situation where almost certainly they're going to be shot dead the moment their head pops over the trench, then he says cynically, you could get a nasty injury off this wooden ladder, you could get a splinter in your finger. And he says that to console the others who are going to their certain deaths, that the Oxford professor has a cunning plan to end the war this year, and it's tragic that it's not going to be in time to save them. This year, they reveal, as part of the joke, is 1917. You know all about Brandeis and Untermeyer. There's somebody at my door, John. I'm going to ignore it. And this is more...
George, would you like to keep this 10 minutes and I can always clip the rest?
No, it needs to be told together.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you know that in 1917, by appointing those two Jews to the Supreme Court in America, the war was extended by 2 years, and that policy of demonizing Germans and creating the hatred of German goods led to the 1931 conflict as well. Absolute ethnic hatred sparked deliberately by the leadership teams in these global conflicts. Okay, so that reveals for us who Mr. Bean was and why Quentin Bryce, when I revealed that she revealed that as a joke about the capacity for Anzacs to make a sacrifice and to give their lives with an immense sense of humour. And you see the cynicism of the videos of the opening ceremony of the Olympics. Then this morning, I'm just going to let my son in the door.
Okay.
Grant, I'm right in the middle of a video, it'll be 10 minutes. Come in. I'll get a coffee. Where was I? Oh, Mr. Bean. Yeah, so a global laugh at the war dead's expense, and you realise what the Chariots of Fire tune is?
What was that, George?
It's a global joke at the war dead's expense, and you realise the Chariots of Fire thing?
Yeah.
We have talked explicitly about the religious fraud over the last 7 or 8 days. We've revealed the Piso theory. We've revealed that is the basis for the taking the piss joke.
Yeah.
Over 2,000 brutal years. It explains the martyrdom of billions of people. It explains the Holocaust. It explains the genocides. It explains the martyrdoms and the Christian missions culling all of the pagans globally. Yeah? So what the Chariots of Fire joke is a joke about not being prepared to do amateur sport on a Sunday because of your religious beliefs. Do you remember the film?
Yeah.
Yeah, and can you see how it all hangs together now? They think it's really funny. That film was made, the director was the boss at my university. I forget his name, but he's a Zionist leader, he's a figurehead in the Zion world, and all of this has been plotted by Roman Jews. Roman Jews, that's where the Church of Rome was founded. In 79 AD, they released the New Testament, and Vesuvius exploded onto the Villa Papyri where the Piso family lived.
Exactly.
All of the truths that we talk about have become a vicious joke at the dead's expense. And when I mentioned to you whether or not Hannibal was real and whether or not Hannibal could take an army of elephants over the Alps, I told you that Hannibal's home country was Carthage, and it looks right over it looks right over the Med to where the mafia in Sicily are alleged to have come from. The mafias were a little bit further up the spine of Italy and a little bit closer to Naples and Pompeii. You know, all of those jokes with Frankie Howard, it's the same theme. It's the fraud and the genocides. And when I asked you the question earlier, can you think of the link of Hannibal and the culling of all of Carthage's pagans to Australasia? You did not know the answer, but you know it now?
Skippy.
Yeah, I said it's related to a bush kangaroo, and that Skippy joke is the Scipio genocide. I can't remember the dates for that, but that was almost around the time that we had invented writing and we were able, you know, to get the biblical story told entirely by humans. And we've talked about the Garden of Eden being the Garden of Eden, now the Yemen, and we've talked about Harold Wilson and the local Prime Minister from here, who was Douglas Home, being involved in the carpet bombing to protect the British troops still in the colonial presence, and the BP plant that is still there, which is why Rifkind talked about Rosneft this morning as if the Russians were the only people that were greedy enough to deceive the world's people. But then when I listened to the rest of the programme, the news finished and they introduced a little documentary on a man called the Right Honourable Michael Donald Kirby, and he's a friend of Tony Abbott, the Conservative Prime Minister. And yesterday we talked about the missing corpse of Lord McAlpine, who died under the heel in Italy and has never been given by the world's media a funeral on the world stage. It was just very difficult to grasp, but they emphasise that the man who's a judge and a homosexual and a human rights activist who's prepared to defame, this man's over 70, which is why he had to retire as a judge and move into the human rights in inverted commas sector.
Yep.
So he retired at 70 and then began to make war crime accusations about the 19 to 20-year-old person who's the leader in North Korea. And you know that there was a complete lockdown on press communications, on reporters going into North Korea,
Yep.
until Google decided to break that. And when they went in, they were able to spread the news that the weapons that were given them from nuclear-free South Africa and traded to them by Bredenkamp and his empire of weapons traders. South Africa, in the place called Pelindaba, which David Cameron visited when he was only, I think he was 24. He went there with David Kelly in a weapons delegation to buy Bredenkamp's illicit nuclear weapons. It's been in the news that we released for months. We know the civil servants that were friends of David Kelly, who was also in that delegation, and we know the massive cover-ups at border control that cover up the truth about how nuclear-free Rhodesia and nuclear-free RSA, where Mandela, when he took over there, it was a huge problem for the apartheid regimes that were trading those weapons. And they had to make up fairy stories like Pelindaba to make it all look legitimate. The weapons inspectors, when they declared that there were no nuclear weapons, which is a crock of lies, they were given ploughshares as a cynical reward. You know, the turning swords into ploughshares thing? Yeah. So this guy Kirby hits on Kim Sung-il, who's 20 years old, in Korea. You can see the fear in his eyes, because he's just a New World Order Rothschild's puppet in that country. And what Kirby pretends to be doing is a fan of common law, and he likes to see common law enforced. But I didn't know anything about him, so I looked him up and he's got a Facebook page, and guess what it says on the Facebook page as a title? It's now in my slideshows and it's going to be an illustration for this video. He's got the image. I can point my camera at it if I can get... There we go. Michael Kirby, Australia's next Governor General. Yeah. In the end, he lost the vote, but it tells you that he's a close friend of the Conservative government. In his video on Radio 4 this morning, where he's talking up his human rights profile, he emphasises the importance of his links and his friendship with the Conservative governments globally. But he's hitting on a fascist leader in a relatively innocent country that has been suppressed by China and the West for centuries. You know all about the history of the control and manipulation of those countries, using leaders that are trained. Chiang Kai-shek met met FDR, Stalin and Churchill several times in World War II. He's a plant that's trained in the West like the other world leaders. You know all about the history of Tavistock, Brookings, all of the mind control and geopolitical, Georgetown, where Henry Kissinger trained Barroso. All of them now are resigning in panic, and this is a deliberate false flag to make it look like law enforcement is on the side of decency in Australia. I've told you, we talked yesterday about how innocent policing is being stripped out by money launderers all over the world, and Gordon Bowden and I have revealed how all of the laundering thing is led by world leaders out of places like Finchley. Now, I've got no actual crimes to pin to Michael Kirby, but you can see how the news vents work now. When I told you the other day that we were in the news, after we revealed all of the energy scams, there are 240 companies trading chaotically without detection in money laundering and tax evasion cabals for the big 6 energy companies in this country. We made a very explicit video. I've published that on my website, and what we got in the news on Monday morning, which I relayed to you within the hour, was that when we debunked the exhaustible and depleted oil reserves thing and the rampant rises in the prices at the forecourt was actually a scam related to the global warming scams, where oil is a renewable resource. We talked about it being made in the core of the earth. The first item on the news article on Monday morning was about dinosaurs and their history. Yeah, it's a crock of shit. Yeah. Everything that Gordon talks about in the virtual oil and gas industry, where it's just a stock market fraud and the investors, the shareholders and the savers and the pension funds get defrauded of everything that they've worked for their whole lives, and that includes police jobs and pensions. Yeah, it could not be more corrupted, and this guy who wanted to be Australia's next Governor General is quite content to be a plant that says that law enforcement globally is perfectly legitimate, when we know that they are laundering the money out using the same vents and boiler rooms and mail forwarding services as Mrs. Thatcher and Mrs. Thatcher's closest friends, Pinochet, who was involved in the Latin American genocides, and all of the narcotics things that we talked about in those videos yesterday, and the narcotics involvement that embroils the royal family and the British Navy, we've talked about at length. That was revealed for the world by Greg Hallett. And everything that they introduced, like the Peter Williams QC, the Williams name in the Man Kirby's debate, all of it is designed to cover up the absolute truth that we talk about as amateurs in our own office or our own living room in our own house, which is going to be dispossessed from us by the crooked lawyer networks, or in my case it's going to be taken from me because I've led my life in innocence, working on behalf of the nation that I live in and the students and kids that I teach in those countries. Those kids have a lot of respect for me and what I've done over the years, and as they begin to realise that the university funding is disappearing because of these crimes right at the top of government, and they're losing their jobs without any redundancy pay, and we mentioned the Dundee University issues the other day, it is now at breakpoint, and the BBC and the corrupted medias can no longer protect themselves, because the people that they plant in front of the news the following day after the real news is broken, and you said to me yesterday, it's a shame that Jim Fetzer has not got the courage to publish your absolute truths about the financial crimes. All the conspiracy theories get covered, but when it's a financial crime involving President Bush, Bill Gammell and Knight of the Realm in Scotland, or the Clinton family and the links to Guistra and the links to the Uramin frauds and the uranium mines and a lot of the oil and gas scandals like Bush Overby, there is no product, and for 3 generations they have been cheating their investors. I think we should stop there, because we've given the public the gist of how, when we make a video and you listen to the key themes we talk about, if they tune into Sky News the following morning or they listen to Radio 4, I don't listen to it anymore because it's a crock of lies. But you can see exactly how the propaganda works. Let me tell you about the biggest crock of lies that they told us.
George, I'll tell you why I'm going to stop at this end, because I want to stop it before they drop me out, then I can save it. Okay,
that's good. But can I just continue with the Radio 4's deceit and cheating and deceiving their people. They gave 2 lectures. The economic lectures for Radio 4 in the last 2 years were given by people called Mervyn King and Peter Marks. Now, Mervyn King is the boss at the Bank of England for several decades, or for a decade or more. His predecessor was a man called Eddie George. What they have done is to train central bank leaders globally to steal and launder from their nation and the taxpayers and citizens in that country. Now, Radio 4 picked Mervyn King to give the lecture 3 years ago. They picked Peter Marks to give the lecture in the following days. Now, Peter Marks is a much more anonymous figure. He was the head of the Co-op Bank. Peter Marks has been completely disappeared from the Co-op Bank since all the news about the drug addiction and the very, very highly paid salaries that the drug addicts get to dismember their company. It was dismembered by Peter Marks and the Loaves Verdi project. All of the money that they got to buy 600 branches of Loaves so that they could have a street presence was borrowed from someone. Can you guess who it was, John? Oh, sorry, John stopped making the video.
No, go on.
It was the Lloyds Banking Group.
Okay.
They gave the Co-op Bank a loan to acquire themselves, and the next CEO in the boardroom was the head of the Lloyds Banking Remuneration Panel. Yeah, Marx got £5 million to desert his company, and when you look at his director registrations on Company Check, you'll see that he's into all busted banks for several decades, certainly into the Anglo-Irish crashes, and that is a tragedy for an innocent little mutual like the Co-op, which was gloating about how much it had in the bank. It's now been entirely asset stripped, and the coverage of that Radio 4 gave is only covered now with the images that I got when those stories were released of Peter Marks and the corrupted boardroom at Lloyds Verdi. And you must appreciate where the Verdi Islands are and the tax haven connotation of that vicious criminal joke. Yeah, everything gets asset stripped by the profiteers, and the BBC make them respectable for it. It is gonna come to an end. Every video we make gets more and more deeply into their cabal, and all we need to do is share it with our global friends, who are all impoverished, who all get a paltry pension because of this criminality right at the head of government. Is that enough?
Oh, I think that's more than enough, George. It's enough to make anyone sick.
And if you're a youngster, you will not be able to understand the Scipio joke. The Scipio joke is Skippy the bush kangaroo that I watched when I was 6 or 7, is the joke about Scipio, the very effective genocidal leader from the Church of Rome and the Roman Empire, culling the Carthaginian nation almost within the view of what became the mafia epicenter of Sicily. The mafias are not in Sicily, they're in the government buildings.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that is a simple message, so we'll close there.
Yep. Okay, George.
Cheers, John. Thanks for your help.
Take care.